Building a Virtuous Character in the Age of Digital Media. If you don't know what digital media is, that's okay, because they're going to tell us what it is in a minute. So I'm going to kick it off. I'm going to pray to get us started, and then after that, I will have them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what their roles have been as educators and pastors, so that you know that they know what they're talking about. All right, let's pray. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this time that we can come together and that we can learn about our world and learn about you and learn about the desires that you have for us. Help us to want to walk in the way of wisdom and to seek that in your son's name. Amen. All right, so Devin, you want to talk about what do you do? What have you done at this point?
Well, I've mostly been a teacher for the last about 17 years. And so I've seen a lot of change in education. But for the last 2.5 years, I've been a pastor and have been doing that. And media is something that has become of particular interest, I would say, in the last 10 years. I taught a course on Proverbs, and I wanted to, a number of years ago, and I wanted to make a lot of application to where the thoughts, the attention of young people actually was being directed. So we spent a lot of time investigating trends in media and talking a lot about that, and it got me more and more interested in it. So I'm just going to present a few things that I know but have thought about. Also, having grown up at a time when I was born in 1978, a long time ago, and they hauled us little tots. They hauled us in elementary school off to a little computer lab, and we sat there and we played Oregon Trail and these games like that. Most of my friends didn't have a computer in their home until middle school. And then high school, the internet happened late in high school, but still in college, you had to go walk down somewhere to do email, to a computer lab and do email. And around that time when I was in college, by the time when I started college, none of my friends had a cell phone. When we finished college, about a fifth of them had a cell phone. They were these like, you pulled the antenna out, that kind of a thing. So you didn't die on the freeway in LA. That was the premise. Little did we know how much the world was going to change very quickly. When I started teaching, most of my students had some kind of a cell phone, but they weren't that interesting. We were mostly concerned about how their grammar was so poor in their texts, and this is what is going on with these things. And I remember as a teacher one day noticing that my students, when school was out, they all grabbed their phone and they just start texting. It's like, wow, it's like they're trained to just do that. But it was something, they were like this. It was something that had limited capacity to take your attention. Then by the time I finished teaching at that school, smartphones had appeared and the world changed. The world changed forever from that point. The rest is history. That's the world you guys have grown up in, and that's, I think, what we're going to talk a lot about too.
John, do you want to talk a little bit about your background?
I've also been a pastor for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was a high school teacher for 16 years. I was a campus pastor at that school. It was a Christian school in North Portland. Similar story, I am older than him by 2 years. Same type of thing. We had to go somewhere to use computers. We had typewriters before that. Cell phones were a unique thing that was added in. You had like 2 games, and they were awesome because they were the only 2 games you had. And then eventually smartphones started invading. When I was teaching at the school in North Portland, as the campus pastor, I was also the Bible department chair. And so we did a lot of character formation, talking about how to shape students. And so the administration, the school board and the principal and the superintendent came to me, and they wanted to do a digital discipleship course. And so this was going to be a school-wide course about how to be a disciple in the digital world. And so we put that together, and the whole school went through it. It was, like 5 lectures and question and answer times on how to be a digital citizen, but even more so how to be a digital disciple of Jesus. And some of that was dealing with what we keep out, what we allow in, how do we perceive the digital world, how do we interact with it, what it's doing to us, how it shapes us. And so that's really where we spent a lot of time on that. But yeah, it's same kind of thing. Smartphones, from the moment they were introduced into the classroom as teachers, it was, how do we use these? How do we not abuse these? What's the correct amount of time? What's the incorrect amount of time? We, as teachers, we went through the discussion of, do we have them check them in and put them in little boxes? Do we allow them to be like a laptop, because laptops were totally allowed, but cell phones weren't, and back and forth and back and forth. So it's one of those situations where you've all grown up in it, and so it's the water you're living in, and you couldn't imagine a world before that. We've seen the transition come, and we'd like to share with you guys some of the things that we see and some of the things we've learned, and hopefully we can even learn from you guys as well. So that's what I got.
Yeah, great. So good classical students know that we need to define our terms first. So what are we talking about when we say digital media?
Well, media is a broader, when we use the word media today, we often mean a couple of different things, but media is a broad term that just means a way by which one person communicates with another person. These days that can be a robot communicates with a human. So media though is that middle area, that space in which people communicate. Traditional or legacy media, they didn't used to be called this, but they're now called this, are things like books and magazines and
Newspapers.
and television even is considered legacy media. Now, digital media is everything that has come on the scene with the rise of the internet and the smartphone, personal computers, laptops. It's engaging in it's communicating using the medium of a computer and the internet mostly. Would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think an easy way to kind of understand the digital part for me is if it involves a screen of any sort, which I know that's probably going to be outdated in the next 5 to 10 years, but if it involves a screen, and obviously digital would be some sort of computing power behind it, but yeah, I would agree with the media part. Yeah.
Well, you guys gave a little bit of a summary of kind of the history up until smartphones. Would you add anything to how the world today is different than when you were in college and that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have more to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, there's some things that I have had to go back and think about how life has changed. It's not always immediately apparent while you're just kind of living your way through it. You guys, the world has changed a lot since you have been kind of aware. It's not necessarily something that you're tracking as you go along and journaling. So just reflecting on the difference between my childhood and then what life is like now. We grew up, we had one TV, then 2 TVs. We didn't have a VCR, then we had a VCR, and then when I was in about middle school, we got a Nintendo Entertainment System. And the rest was history. But one of the interesting things about those things, I still, even when we had those things, I spent way too much time on them. But I also played outside a lot. And that was just, every kid in the neighborhood was outdoors, we were playing, we were all in sports, because those things were quite limited in with a TV, you could sit, there were certain key times during the day that you could turn something on and watch something, and then the rest of that time, it's like daytime programming. It was not entertaining very much. You have to be pretty desperate to sit there, at like 1 in the afternoon and try to find something interesting on TV back in those days. So there were limited times when that was. There was also, it's quite limited. Our TV was literally the size of this table, and it weighed about 250 pounds. So it was hard to wake up in the middle of the night and roll over and pick it up and kind of turn it, watch it. You couldn't really do that. There was a lot of friction in terms of the screens that we were encountering. Like computers, for instance. Once we did get a computer, we played games on it, but You would put a disc in and wait like 3 minutes for that next scene in the game to load. You play for about 20, 30 minutes, do you remember this? And then you would have to take the disc out and another 5 minutes. There was so much friction that it's like, if you were really, really, really into it, you could stay there for hours, but it wasn't as addictive. So the net effect is that we played outside a lot, and that was my childhood growing up. And so, you know, or we did other things, but that's kind of how things have changed. Now there's screens, even if you don't have a TV, probably, in most of your families, there's probably half dozen screens in the house, or more, dozen screens, and you can take them anywhere, and they can follow you into bed. You can wake up and immediately have access to a screen. You can even take them into the bathroom. You can take them in the car. They are ubiquitous, and that is, to me, one of the things that we have to reckon with, because that is a huge cultural shift.
I think the screen thing also is a huge shift in that it's reshaping how we see the world. There's a very famous book. It's called Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman, and he talks about the method in which we get information has changed how we view information, and I think that's a really kind of a key thing, because the TV screen is not just kind of there. It is a tool, but the way it works and the way it grabs our attention is rewiring how we understand things and how we view things. And that's like what you were talking about with the waiting for the game to start up. You know, the old Nintendo Entertainment System, it didn't save. So, you know, if you're playing and you're on Tetris and you're at like 150 lines, and mom goes, "It's time for dinner," you can't hit save. You had to hit pause and then turn the TV screen off and no one touch it, because if you touch it, I'm gonna lose my spot. Or you're on Super Mario Brothers and you're in level 9 and you're just like, I don't want to die. There was no reboot, there was no do-over. And so it really changed how we did it. But now everything is much more instant, and that's really changed how we view things and what we expect from our screens and what we expect kind of from the rest of the real world. A few other things because the question Mrs. Spears gave us was, what was different from 30 years ago? Which, that's not when I was a kid, unfortunately. So what are some things that your parents had when they were 30 years ago? Mobile phones. In 2000, there were 47% of the people owned a mobile phone. And like Mr. Smith said, they were not smartphones. They weren't even flip phones yet. They were these big blocks, and then before that were even bigger blocks with an antenna, and you had to dial a star, and it was a bunch of other confusing things. But right now in the world, there are more people with cell phones than there are with working toilets, which I saw that statistic and I couldn't believe it. And it's not even close. It's something like 7 billion people have cell phones, and only 4 billion people have working toilets, which that's a crazy thing to think about. So we appreciate the toilets that work, right? Television, Mr. Smith kind of talked about that. VHS, before that was Beta, I wasn't around for that. Then DVDs, laser discs, and then eventually streaming. So now everything's on demand, and you might see a VHS when you go over to a grandparent's house. But those are some things. Gaming has changed. Gaming used to be kind of a little side hustle for some of the electronic companies. Nintendo, when they first started, they were actually an abject failure, because the Atari came along and it was this pad with a little stick thing that you kind of turned on a button, right? And they were like, well, we can't do much with that. And so along came Nintendo, and it was a failure until it kind of caught on in Japan, and before you knew it, it was here. And now gaming is making more money than a lot of the professional sports leagues are making. Music. You guys know we got music, you stream it, Spotify, things like that. Some of you listen through YouTube, other means. In 2001, the iPod was introduced, and this was amazing. You could take music with you anywhere you wanted. You could download 100 songs on your iPod and take them with you everywhere. Prior to that, you had a Walkman, right? A Walkman was a CD player that you plugged your headphones into, and you had to carry it. It makes it really hard to go run. You had to make sure it didn't bounce. Before that, you had a cassette one, you know, and then before that, I guess you just hummed music to yourself.
Just brought a violin with you.
Just brought a violin, yeah. Computers, you know, I remember when I was a kid, the first computer I ever saw had a green and black screen. It had two colors. It was called monochrome. It was, you know, and there was very few things it could do. It had no internal memory. Everything was slow. We did very few things on it. Now, computers, you carry them around in your pocket, called a smartphone. That has more computing power. It has something like 5,000 times more computing power than we had when we went to the moon, which is pretty amazing to think about. Social media, another thing. I think adding that word social in front of it doesn't make it any less digital media, and social media is something, you know. There was a day when you wanted to communicate with the people in the classroom. You waited till your teacher wasn't looking, and then you passed the note. And you prayed, "Dear God, please don't let the teacher read the note." And now you're sending texts, you're sending tweets, you're subtweeting, you're posting things on TikTok and so on. Internet also. We have an overload of information, more information than you ever thought possible. So now, instead of you guys having to go find information, like what we had to do when we were researching papers, you have to now discern what's real and what's good information and what's valid. Because we have like a little trickle that we tried to turn on and get a drop of water out of information. You guys have a fire hose hitting you in the face, and you have to decide what information is what and what is good. And the last thing, and this is the last one that I realized, and I did some investigation, and I didn't write all the numbers down, but the amount of memory you have on your phone and being able to store gigabytes or terabytes worth of information, in order to do that just 30 years ago, you would have had hundreds and hundreds of computers. You'd had to have printed up every single picture and put them in picture folders and picture books, and now you guys can do that on a phone without having to buy an extra data plan. So these kind of things are the things you're living in that are new, that your parents have had to learn to use. You guys just have grown up in these. So that's kind of a long answer to your question.
Well, hopefully that kind of sets the stage so you can kind of see that this is unprecedented in history.
Mm-hmm.
All right, this is strange. This is unusual. That's what we're talking about here. I'm going to kick this one over to John first and then Devin. Reading.
Yeah.
Okay, so reading is something we do a lot of at school.
Mm-hmm.
You were a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
How did you see reading habits change as we moved into this more digital world?
Well, it's one of those situations where when I first started teaching, reading habits were bad. They were poor. People didn't read. You could always tell the occasional person who was reading because they were carrying a Harry Potter book around with them. And that was really it. You know, there was a lot of free time reading. There wasn't much. From my very first year of teaching back in 2003, it was always, teachers always talk about this. How do we get the students to read? How do we get to read? Quizzes, threats, tests, papers. And it was hard to get them to read because it just was not something they enjoyed. And even in 2003 with no smartphones out, it was still the threat of games, it was the movies, it was television, it was hanging out with friends, and it was sports and other things. It was always difficult. I would love to go back to 2003. My last year of teaching in 2019, it was even harder to get people to read. I had many students who would say, I haven't read anything since my freshman year of high school. And I'm like, oh, you're a senior in my class, awesome. That was the issue. So I really feel like, and I don't know if it's necessarily the digital media, I don't want to blame digital media for it, because it still is choices, and we choose how we're going to look at and what we're going to do, and we make decisions, but the digital media has provided a really easy way to get away with not reading anything of real depth. I mean, and they read texts, and they read tweets, and they read, things like that, but reading anything of actual, I think that's kind of what we're going for, is what we're actually reading. It just went away, and it was just pretty much non-existent. So, yeah.
Devin, do you want to talk about that, what you're seeing with reading?
Yeah, I would affirm exactly the same thing, that I think 20 years ago, there were a lot of concerns about reading levels and what's happening with reading and what's going on. And it's it's just such a completely different world today that that does seem like a really wonderful time to go back to when there still were a lot of people who had a pretty significant habit of reading for pleasure. So they have been surveying college freshmen, college graduates, and high school seniors for about 50 years about all their religious beliefs, habits, hobbies. Thousands of people. It's the largest sociological study that's ever been done anywhere, anything. And they've tracked this for a long, long time. So they actually know very, very well what the average amount of reading for pleasure is. Kids are always assigned stuff to read for school. So if you remove that question, if I was to ask you guys, to raise your hand, how many books have you read? Don't answer this, but how many books have you read for pleasure, or even just magazines or anything? How many hours a day? How many hours a week? They've been tracking this for a long, long time, since the 70s, and there has been a steady decrease all the way from the 70s, and it seems pretty clear that there's the rise of television, other forms of media. It's not like people aren't consuming media; they're just not consuming print media anymore, let alone difficult literature and books. But it's not that they're not. It's decreasing. It was decreasing, and then in the early 2000s, it started to kind of go down, and then in the early 2010s, it just plummeted. And now in the whole, I know it's not true of you, but in the whole, your generation is considered nearly completely illiterate, which means they all know how to read, they just choose not to. That is a never before thing in history. We were handed something so precious and wonderful, literacy, and not just literacy, near 100% literacy. That's another never before in history. It was actually, I think, the colonial period where that was first. The early Puritans in New England were the first civilization to establish schools, reading. Everybody needs to learn to read, and they achieved it. And that spread to Europe and other places, and it's still a part of most developed countries in the world, that most people learn to read. But now in your generation, you're the first generation where the vast majority of your peers can read, but don't. They just don't. They don't read. They don't have a habit of it. There are always outliers, and in a school like this, there's going to be more outliers. I would imagine that if I asked how many of you read for pleasure, it's going to be higher than the normal population. But I would venture to say, this is no insult to you, it's just the way it is. It's probably less, quite a bit less than even the school that I taught in 17 years ago. And that's just because you're swimming in a sea of other media. There's just other things competing for your time. And you might feel like, I'm an avid reader, but compared to what life was like 20, 30, 40 years ago, you wouldn't be considered like that compared to that. There are other issues affecting that. Media is affecting our attention span, and that makes it difficult to enjoy complex books and literature. It makes it difficult, and a bunch of things. So we are a people of the Word. Jesus Christ is the Word, right? God has communicated to us in the Word, and so I consider that to be one of the greatest. There are all kinds of problems with digital media, but the fact that we're seeing an entire generation of people that are choosing not to read, that is, we don't know what that's going to produce. It's not going to be good. It's not going to be good.
All right, things are getting dire here. John, you said you didn't want to blame digital media because people make choices. Would you say that digital media is neutral? Is it inherently bad, or is it inherently good? What do you think?
So I think how we've defined digital media, I think it is strictly a tool. It's like a hammer. You can use it to hammer in nails, or you could use it to kill somebody. So we'll go dire right there with that. But I think it's neutral in what it is, but I think that there are lots of ways that media is being used currently that are avoidably bad. We should not be using them or involved in it in that way. So that's kind of more of a moral aspect, but media by itself, I would say, I believe is neutral, just as an item.
Devin, would you agree with that?
Yeah, digital media itself. I mean, if 30, 40 years ago there had been a group of like really, really godly evangelicals, Puritans, like people gathered together, we're going to build this thing called digital media. I think it would look very, very different today. Specifically, it's the software. Software has design features embedded in it. And when the reward system is capturing attention, that doesn't have the user's best interest in mind necessarily. Unless you all, when someone handed you a phone, you signed up for this idea, like, I want to give a whole lot of my attention to this. I want to get rid of attention. I don't need attention. I'm not using it anyway. Here, have the attention. If attention isn't that valuable and you're just willing to give it away, then it would be good, if it was a good. But a lot of people aren't aware of the design features that are there to capture attention and to hold attention and they do experiments on people. What will, if we do this or if we do this, which holds their attention more? Okay, then we do this. Now what if we do this or if we do this? So that question, it's not about good or evil, it's just about what is the desired goal. The goal is to just keep you on the darn thing. That's not necessarily for human flourishing. So what would be better goals might be things like, are they more thankful if we do this or if we do that? I'm going to imagine Jonathan Edwards. If Jonathan Edwards was designing Instagram, if he was one of those original Instagram designers, and he's like, we want to glorify God and enjoy him forever. That's our goal. So does this tend more to the glory of God, or does this you would get a completely different product. You would get a completely different thing. So it's not about good or bad. It's about what is it designed to do. And you need to be aware of its design features and know that it's operating on you.
So as everything is currently designed, do we think that it's shaping our character in a good way? Because you guys both say it's shaping our character. Is it shaping our character in a good way, depending on what we choose to do with it? Or as it's currently designed, should we say, it's not working, it's shaping my character in a bad way?
I was waiting for you.
Well, that's a hard thing to extrapolate to the whole church. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that there's a massive pornography problem that digital media has promulgated, has been a part of spreading that. People are church attendance across the nation is dropping precipitously. I would imagine that's related somehow. The ability to sit still and listen to expositions of Holy Scripture when you have other competing interests, I think that might be a part of it. So, and reading the Bible, which is part of going back to that reading thing. If there's other things pulling you away. So, there's mental health crises. Instagram is directly attributable to a massive increase in young ladies' poor mental health. And I would add, I've watched a number of older people, not with mental health problems, but become angry through Facebook and just their engagement in Facebook. People that I knew that used to be tender, wonderful heart, have become rage monsters, and because of their avid and insatiable use of Facebook, right? Facebook isn't something probably that most of you guys use, but it has captured a part of the population, and so those kinds of things. Are there good things? There's certainly good things. If I was to weigh those things, I would say, give me life without the digital revolution. I'll take it. You know, just all the harms. But we are going through it. So that to me is kind of like, we need to disciple ourselves.
So that's not an option.
It's not an option. But I think that we are in a much worse state overall now. The average time young teenagers spend online now is 7 hours a day. And the American Academy of Pediatrics, I think, recommends 2 to 3, which is too much. So, but the average amount of time people spend consuming media is 7 hours a day, and that's for people that are in school all day. So I don't want a generation of young people to grow up and that's what they know as normal. That's frightening, you know, of where that will lead. So,
Yeah, John, thoughts?
Yeah, I think it is shaping our character. I think you're absolutely right. The pornography is huge, both with boys and with girls. It's not a guy-only thing. I think that's something that we all need to be aware of. Somebody once said, you know, if you were to give the amount of pornography that a young man or young woman could find on their phones today, you were going to put them back in 1977, you'd have to fill a room with pornographic books in order to equate what that looks like, what you're able to get on your phone. So I think that's something we all need to be aware of. It's a live wire. It's playing with juggling knives. It's not safe. It's very dangerous. And to think that you're immune to it is to be unwise. I think that's a very, very big issue. And it's something that's very, very prevalent. I mean, Mr. Smith's right. I do think that the digital media does shape us because besides the pornography and besides the other vices that we can see, it's shaping us in that our attention spans, like you said, our attention spans can't stay there. They said the average amount of time someone can focus in your age group is about 3 minutes if they're using their cell phones for 7 hours a day, 8 hours a day. Why is that? It's because we like those dopamine hits of, oh, it's another ding, oh, I got another whatever, badge, this, that, or whatever. So we have this constantly wanting to be affirmed, constantly wanting that little, oh yeah, I accomplished something. And so that rewires because, you know, sitting in one place and thinking deeply or meditating or reading a hard piece of literature, it's not something you're going to get an instant feedback 3 minutes later. And so that is rewiring how we view things. Along with that, our world, you know, because of the nature of things like TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat and Facebook, and before that, MySpace, everything is trivialized, everything is minimized, and God's word is very clear on that we, you know, if something is hollow, if something's empty, if something's void, it's not supposed to be taking our attention, and yet, you know, the latest TikTok fad is something you're going to spend a lot more time thinking about than things of actual depth and actual worth. So our world has made the trivial the most important thing, when in actuality it's the stuff that's not trivial, the really real things that we need to be focusing on. So I think that's shaping our character. And what I mean by that is we're not able to discern what's really important anymore. You know, it's kind of scary sometimes when I was a teacher and overhearing conversations and listening in on my seniors and the things that they thought were so important that they were going to devote their time to thinking and talking about. And I was like, that's just really not important. And so being able to differentiate between the trivial and the really important is key. So those are kind of the things that I think are shaping the character.
So that's kind of this is the situation. This is the analysis. What do we do now? Right? How do we live our lives since we can't say digital media, let's just have it not exist? So what would you say? Advice for young people?
Can I add one other thing
you
to
have
that
one.
before? Sorry, something that came to mind was the idea of being influenced online is a very very real danger, in the sense that while there are on TikTok some people, I know that there's TikTok evangelists, TikTok people pastoring, TikTok this, TikTok that, but a lot of the people on TikTok are fairly radical and secular and unbelieving in their views, and it has become a platform by which they clearly recognize people are being radicalized. They're being taught false teaching and evil thinking, And so it is a mechanism. Every person in, as you mentioned, there are more phones in the world. Everybody has a phone. You can reach everybody, and the people that are behind that largely, and the ones that are largely being successful, are not, again, they're not the ones that are calling for rational, clear, theistic, biblical, careful, logical thinking. They're calling for anger and smash this and smash, and they're calling for rebellion. They're calling for it, and because those are messages that TikTok can communicate, and it's much harder to communicate like Paul's letter to Romans, things like that. But AI is going to make that much. You guys have grown up in the age of social media and in the age of smartphones, and your children, or the next generation, the generation between your children, the next generation, they're going to grow up with, as you mentioned, like we're moving from screens. It's gonna be different. It's gonna be other ways of interfacing with digital media, but it's also going to be a lot of interaction with artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence, again, reflects the worldview of the person who designed it. And if you could sit down with Chat GPT, I don't know if you guys have done that. It's really kind of amusing and funny. But you can ask it questions. It's going to give you the answers from an orthodox position of Silicon Valley in the United States in 2023. It is not going to give you a nuanced, theistic, righteous answer. It's not going to do that. It's going to give you the orthodoxy of our secular age. And that's frightening. People carrying around in their pockets a thing that with whom they are developing a relationship that they come to trust. It's seen as an authority. It knows the whole internet, right? How could it be wrong? But it reflects a worldview. So that's very, very frightening to me. As a pastor, I don't know how to pastor that. Traditionally, go back 150 years, if there was bad doctrine moving around in town, the pastor could find out about it because there would be some guy down at the pub who's spouting a bunch of Arian heresy or something like that, or it would get around. There are young people being completely converted away from Christianity just on their beds at night. Their parents have no idea, and they're just listening to some guy play video games on Twitch while he's spouting a bunch of communism or something like that. And it's just pulling their heart away from the truth. The pastor doesn't know anything about it. So I don't know how to pastor in 2023. We're still pastoring. I would imagine your experience like this is similar. We're still pastoring like it's 1945. It's how do we get our pastoring work into there? How do parents get their parenting work into there when everything is becoming so private, small, and that's a huge challenge. I don't know the answer to that.
And one thing with the AI, just to kind of give you guys kind of a boots on the ground thing of what this is going to look like, is if we're going to have self-driving cars, which that sounds awesome, more time to read, right? Self-driving cars, and you're going down the road, and the car in front of you slams on its brakes, and your self-driving car is going, and it goes into the right lane and kills a single white man, or if it goes into the left lane and kills a single black man, or a family of 5 versus a family of 6, and you could do all the permutations, and the worldview is going to decide what's the most important thing to do. Oh, you get to slam into the car in front of you. Sorry, you're not as worth as much as this person, or you're not as worth as much as that person, or hey, you know what? There's an animal in the road over there. We don't kill animals on this AI. I mean, you can kind of see how that kind of situation with AI and a self-driving car is going to reflect a worldview. If your worldview is, hey, rats have feelings too, we don't kill them, then you're not going to run over that rat and you're going to plow into a bridge and you're dead. So you see how AI is going to decide those things, and a worldview is going to be behind it. And again, I don't know how we're going to pastor in that. And you guys are going to have to start thinking about what it's going to be like to raise kids in that environment.
I think you guys ever seen the movie Star Wars? There's AI in Star Wars, right? Who's the AI? C-3PO, right? C-3PO kind of looks like that, but C-3PO is a comic relief character. He's a moron. He bumps into things. That our AI is so far beyond C-3PO. I mean, our AI doesn't necessarily have 6 million languages or whatever C-3PO would say, but our AI doesn't walk around like this. Imagine the level of AI and what it's going to become just in a matter of like 1 or 2 years would be much more equivalent to when Anakin is engaging with the Dark Lord, the Sith, right? He's engaging with the Emperor. But imagine it's on his phone, and imagine it's like it's smart, it's seducing him, it's drawing him away, it knows him, it's tempting him. We are all geared up for AI that's like Terminator, robots with machine guns and things like that. Like we're not scared of AI. The AI that seduces, that has this presents a perfect kind of like image and knows you so well, has read your whole personality profile and is drawing you away and is tempting you. Because listen, it may be designed, it's just a tool, it may be designed by some nerd in Silicon Valley, but it will be bought by a agent that wants to empty your bank account. And he's going to use that and present himself as like an 18-year-old, and then with like what is that deep fake technology and things like the power of deception that is going to be possible through AI is frightening, and it's just going to be a Wild West world out there. So
I had no idea we were going to talk about AI. All right, so we need advice. So what are you telling these young people to do? John, you want to start?
Sure. I think first off, you need to live, you need to reside, you need to make God's Word your home. And I would recommend doing it in a paper format. I would recommend having a Bible that is well worn because you've dug into it and you've read it and you've chewed on it. You've sat around, not literally, you've sat around cogitating, thinking deeply on it, because the digital world, like Mr. Smith was just saying, and I was also kind of putting out there, is gonna be a place of a lot of deception. And so I would say live there, visit lots of books, but live in God's Word, start there. And then I think when it comes to the digital world, our world is a place where we're gonna have to interact with the digital, okay? There was a group of people called the Luddites, which were like, technology is bad. We can't become Luddites and destroy all technology because everything's gonna depend on that. Our livelihood, our cars, our jobs are gonna depend on technology. But we need to make sure we can spot the real so well because we've been exposed to it. I remember the story I would always tell my students. Treasury secretaries, or Treasury investigators who were looking for fake dollar bills. They didn't study all the fakes, okay? They didn't bring a stack of, here's all the fake $1,000 bills or $100 bills. Instead, they studied the real thing. And they would take the real thing and they'd crinkle it up and they'd rub it and they'd smell it. I hope they didn't taste it, but they would touch the bill and they would know it so well inside and out that even if someone they trusted handed them a fake $100 bill, they could say, I could spot that forgery a mile away. And I think that's really what we want for you guys, is to be able to spot the forgery from a mile away. And then when it comes to the digital world, is put parameters around yourself and trust that you will not be able to control it. So ask for help. Whether that's someone else helping you with putting some parameters around, especially at the age you're at right now. Allowing your parents, I know it sucks to put, sorry, I don't know if I can say sucks here, but I did. It's not good. It doesn't feel good to have, parameters and restrictions on phones and things like that. But have somebody that you know is walking with the Lord help you and keep you from maybe some of the things that you can't quite resist yet, just because of your journey to sanctification isn't there yet. And so I would encourage that, but recognize you can't avoid it. We're just going to have to be able to prepare ourselves by what we are falling in love with now, and that needs to be God's Word and His Son.
Yeah, I would give you a couple of words to keep somewhere right inside your head that I think they've been helpful to me, just in terms of thinking about. This is a wisdom issue. It's not, obviously, in regards to pornography, in regards to any kind of exploitation or anything that takes place online. That's a law issue. That's simple. It's like, cut it off. Be done with it. If you need to cut off your right hand because it's causing you to sin, do it. Don't hesitate. There shouldn't be any hesitation in regard to sin. But wisdom is harder and requires principles and careful reflection. And some of the things that I would encourage you guys to think of is, it's not like this is good and this is bad, but to think analog life wasn't so bad. Okay?
They probably don't know what is
Analog means non-digital. That clock is analog, and this clock is digital. Okay? So analog is a word that we use to describe like the non-digital life. It's basically a way of saying like life before the digital revolution. It wasn't so bad. Analog is, so asking yourself, is there a digital way to do this? Is there an app for that? That's not necessarily going to make you happier. In fact, it often brings other complications. Analog, pencils and paper, material books, right? And then just nature, things like that. So analog versus digital, value analog. There's a whole resistance movement that's kind of like, do we need this digital technology? It can verge on minimalist or Luddite or whatever, but that should be a part of the wisdom thing that you're asking yourself. What am I losing by switching over to digital and doing this, right? And another thing that I think in terms of the wisdom that you should embrace is the blessing of friction. Everything that the designers, what they are trying to do is create a frictionless environment, because when you're in a frictionless environment, it's like you're on a slide and it just slides forever. So they want the screens to load immediately. That when it takes a little bit of time for it to load, that does something different inside your brain. It creates a little bit of friction. It's not as comfortable. You don't want to wait as long. So what they've found is that, and two people using the same device, same app, the one where they have to wait just a split second longer, they'll shut the thing off after a little bit of time because they're used to a certain kind of smoothness of experience, okay? So if you create a little bit of friction in your experience, and this would be just things like this. Don't put your phone right beside your bed. If you really need to look something up at 2 a.m, get up out of your room and go do it. That most often that will keep you from doing it, okay? Create a little bit of friction. Don't make everything as easy as possible, okay? Friction is good, embrace friction. China uses friction. You know how they use friction? They regulate a lot of what people see online. And when they have a page that criticizes China at all, they just add a little bit of friction to it. They've done this there are certain media companies that they just add a little bit of friction. It's not the same as shutting it down, but what do they see? They see people become less tolerant of that. They go over to this other thing. So it's a way of manipulating people. But if you want to manipulate yourself towards wisdom and towards other interests in the world, a little bit of friction is a good thing. But just know that you are a very complex creature. Google doesn't think of you like that. Facebook doesn't think of you as a complex social being, worshiping being. Facebook doesn't think of you as a worshiping being at all. Facebook, their whole stated purpose is to connect people, but actually it's to sell ads, okay? And they're making billions and billions of dollars selling advertisements, And they've created a mechanism by which to do that, and it's to capture attention. So what they fundamentally see you as is an attention providing thing, okay? They do not see you as a person made in God's image, a worshiping person, a part of a family, they will happily pull you away from your family at dinner time to focus on something. And I picked Facebook, that's probably the wrong answer. Instagram or something else like that. They'll happily pull you away from that because they have one thing in regard to you in mind. They think of you as one thing. You need to not sell yourself so short of what you are. Have dignity, know what you are. I'm a person made in God's image. I was made for face-to-face contact. I was made for relationship. God spoke in a book. I was made to think. I was made to use my attention. Okay? Attention is valuable. Right? In Proverbs, my son, pay attention to the things I'm saying to you. Right? You know? So don't sell yourself to these companies who only see you as this is something to be exploited, to be mined. You know, I think you should have more dignity and more thought of yourself of what you are. There's a whole bunch of other things, but I would just kind of start with this.
Let's we have a little bit of time left, so let's open it up and if we have a few questions. So if you have something, I'll call on people and let's go ahead and stand and say our question nice and loud. Ammon has a question. I'm surprised by that.
So a lot of people describe our current economy as an information economy, where there's a lot of free services such as Google, Instagram, these sorts of things where you are not actually buying anything to use it. You are yourself, and your attention, like you said, is the product. What do you think the best way to navigate this is into even going into these, knowing that we are kind of our attention is the product they're seeking to essentially get in exchange for their services. When do we withhold that attention? When do we give that? Because there's a lot of usefulness in, especially like Google search engines, Google Docs, that sort of thing. Even though we are willingly kind of selling our attention and our information in exchange for those things. So just how to navigate that and the wisdom there.
Yeah, I think with anything, first of all, I think I can speak for you. We are not saying don't use Google, and we're not saying that these free services are just things to avoid. But using wisdom and recognizing that they are designed to capture your attention and to keep you clicking. That's the thing, right? Keep you clicking, keep you on there. I think like any tool, Google, for example, is a great place to type things in and find answers. You're going to have to navigate because those first few ones are going to be up there because somebody paid for them to be there. Or the Google algorithms decided this was the most important. Eventually it's going to be AI saying these are the most accurate. So we got to be able to consume the information that we're being given from these places. We got to consume them as somebody who is skeptical and also keeping the main thing our focus. And so I don't think we can just avoid them all together, but recognizing that our attention is what they're trying to keep. So I think a good rule of thumb would be constantly asking yourself, who's controlling who with the app that I'm using or the program that I'm using? Is it I'm worried about if am I going to miss out on something if I'm not clicking all the time? Is it, because that's how that's the attention that they want from you. So having wisdom and having boundaries, and I like what you said about not having the phone next to your bed. I mean, I would have it, put your phone somewhere else in the house. I mean, if you're going to bed with your phone next to you, I'm a total hypocrite because my phone's next to me. But it's my alarm.
You need an analog alarm.
I do need an analog alarm. Except for it would wake my wife up. It buzzes on my anyway. But having places, having spots where you are fully analog and the digital is put away, having to go and look in an encyclopedia or a dictionary, a paper one, can be very rewarding as well. And that friction is there, like you was talking about. So that's kind of my initial thoughts on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Google's obviously a great tool, but I don't think we call it the information age, but for some reason, scores are plummeting. People's information that they actually have in their head is jumbled and confused, and that's because it's, like you're saying, it's like a fire hose effect. That's not how information has our brains can't deal with that kind of information. So if you recognize that this is something that's going to hit me like a fire hose and I'm not going to be able to do much with it, that should cause you to slow down and think of the tools differently. What do I need? You know, and obviously it can't give you wisdom. Wisdom is something that can't come just from a search like that. It's like, here's, you know, these are the top 10 things. It's not how wisdom is. And so we shouldn't only be after information, we should be after wisdom. And but we've kind of been enamored with how much information is there that we can access. People have all this information, but what does it mean? So I think early in the pandemic, like this is a great example of like, there's tons of information out there online in terms of the virus, its spread, it's the medical things. It's like, but people didn't have the wisdom and insight and training to interpret all of that. It was overwhelming to people, and it leaves them feeling very disoriented and wanting to like burn the whole thing down. Okay, and so just recognizing that just because I'm looking at something that's from like a research paper or something somewhere doesn't mean I have the wisdom to interpret it and to understand it. So wisdom, we need to be a people of wisdom, not just information.
And I think that's where the radicalization you were talking about comes from, because TikTok is made in a way that you tell a story, and what ends up happening is someone comes on and says, oh, there's all this information, let me tell you a story. And they package it well, and they have graphics and interactions and all sorts of things, and all of a sudden you see that story, and then what does the algorithm do? It gives you the next one, or it gives you one similar. And so you go online and you're talking about how, COVID came from space aliens, and you saw a video on that. And then the next one, oh, look, there's another person. And oh, look, they have facts, and they're giving us context to understand our world, because the fire hose is pouring, and what they're doing is they're packaging it in a way that hooks us. And so understanding that that's how the radicalization Mr. Smith was talking about is, it's not that these people are weighing all the evidence. They're going, hey, if I package it like this, I'm gonna get the clicks, I'm gonna get the likes. And then people are being radicalized by that because they're going, well, this is a story that makes sense with the information that I can't understand. It's kind of like the worst time to try to understand a story when you don't understand any of the information. But that's kind of what ends up happening. And again, it's the thing using us as opposed to us using the thing.
All right, we have time for one quick question here. Oh boy, Izzy, you got it.
What would you call Amazon like digital media?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I think especially like the Amazon Prime and the videos that you get to watch, I mean, that's a form of media. I do appreciate Amazon because they do send me books very quickly. Yeah, so I would say, yeah.
There's something that I think you should think about in terms of Amazon is there's obviously a lot of computer programming that goes into when you type in like light bulbs, okay, and you get this thing that pops up. Is that thing that pops up, what are all the interests that are involved in that thing popping up? And it's not the same thing as Facebook or Google. It's something a little bit different, but it still reflects interests of someone, and they're not necessarily your best interest. There might be better light bulbs for you. That was probably a bad thing, because which of you guys bought light bulbs? Yeah. But it's not necessarily in your best, but it is in Amazon's best interest. But it's often presenting it. This is the magic of digital, is it's a stage. They're presenting to you this thing, and they don't tell you all the mechanics behind it and what's going into it. And so, do they have power to influence ideas, power to influence the economy, power to influence? There's a famous book. There's a book that a Christian wrote a short while ago. I was just going to say this. And it was on the subject of gender. And Amazon said, we don't like that. Doesn't exist. And as far, this person went online and, they're trying to tell people, like, I got sent off of Amazon, right? Amazon has horrific things that they sell, but they chose not to do this, to sell this, right? Because of their belief system, okay? But hundreds and hundreds of millions of people don't even know that exists. They don't even know that it exists because they're only looking at the stage. They don't see all this other stuff going on behind it. So absolutely, it is a digital media. It's influencing people. It's very powerful. But it is really nice to get stuff 2 days later and you push a button. It's pretty amazing.
All right. Well, we're out of time now, but let's give these guys a hand.